Here's a rundown of the key points from Quiz 1. So, how did the Sumerians think about the world? The main thing that I want to emphasize here is that in the ancient world, the gods are manifestations of local natural phenomena, the natural forces in which the people find themselves. This is one of the reasons why pagan gods in general are local, and we're going to talk more about this as the semesters go on. But pagan religion is a polytheistic religion, a religion with lots of gods, that represents the local natural forces. And so pagan religion, you are living in a particular place, and that place has gods. You leave that place, you leave the domain of those gods. So if you're in Egypt and you're in Egypt, you're under the domain of the gods of that place, Ra and Horus and Osiris and Isis. You leave Egypt, you go beyond those domains, you leave the purview of Horus and the rest, you walk through Canaan and you fall into the domain of the gods that are in play there, and so like Baal and so forth. You go to Babylon and you come under the purview of the Babylonian gods like Marduk. Pagan gods are local gods. They represent the local natural forces. And the local natural forces in Sumer are difficult and sometimes destructive. The Euphrates is a powerful and dangerous river, not only prone to flooding but difficult to navigate. When floods occur, when bad weather occurs, the results can be catastrophic. Even without that, the difficulties from one year to the next in terms of fertility versus drought requires a very great amount of effort and a high level of agricultural technology. It requires advanced irrigation, a great deal of labor, and so forth. And so the environments, the natural forces in which the Sumerians live are complex, difficult, and often hostile. And that means that the gods that represent those natural forces, the Sumerians don't necessarily trust. Not that they think that the gods are always bad, not that they're constantly pessimistic, but that they can't trust the gods to take care of them. What does that mean? What is the upshot to that? The upshot to that is that the Sumerians believe that they have to trust themselves. In order for anything to be accomplished, in order to make any headway against the corrosive or erosive or destructive power of the gods, that humans have to accomplish. Humans have to work. Humans have to, the message of human existence, the meaning of life is to accomplish, to build, to create permanence that can be passed on as a legacy through human effort, through achievement during life. Afterlife, it's too late, and that's why the Sumerian afterlife is a place of inertia and mourning for the ability to have agency. This is why when Enkidu has dreams of the afterworld in the Epic of Gilgamesh, this is represented as people that were powerful in the real world who are now impotent and miserable as a result of it. The Sumerian afterworld is called the House of Dust because the afterlife, it's too late. You must accomplish now while you have the chance in this life. You can't wait for the gods to do it. You can't wait for your ancestors to do it. You can't wait for anyone else to do it. It has to be accomplished by individuals, and most of all, the act of achieving a legacy great enough to build stability and prosperity. Individuals are not enough. It must be done by a community. And so these are the kinds of things that we see in Sumer. A mistrust of the gods that leads to an emphasis on achievement by the community to create a stable and prosperous future. Who is Sargon? Sargon is a king of Akkad during the Bronze Age. And Akkad is a city-state in central Mesopotamia. These are the kinds of things that you want to bear in mind when you are thinking about who is such and such a person, or who were, the Sumerians. You get a question like that, you want to situate it in place and time, and then talk about what's characteristic of them. So, Sargon, king of Akkad during the Bronze Age. What's important about him? Well, he pioneers the idea of empire, the control of distant resources. The problem with civilization is that once you're planted literally in one place, by becoming dependent on land agriculture, you are stuck with the limited resources of wherever you are living. And that means that you have to engage in long-distance trade in order to get the things that you don't have, whether it's fur or timber or minerals or grain or whatever. You have to engage in long-distance trade to get the resources that are available elsewhere that you don't have locally. Or you can rise up and take control of some distant place and use their resources. This involves two steps. One is conquest, which can be very easy. If you have enough a strong enough local economy, you can put an army into the field, you can go and conquer someplace. That is often a relatively straightforward process. The real problem is dominion. Conquest is easy, dominion is hard. Maintaining control over those distant resources. And this is why empire is something that isn't just about ambition, isn't just about a king wanting to become more powerful. It's too difficult to maintain that authority for it to be anything other than a means of providing resources, control of distant resources that your local community doesn't have. So Sargon pioneers the use of conquest to create dominion, to create control over these distant resources. He gains control over Central and South Mesopotamia. He creates essentially the first empire in this part of the world. And the result of this is a stronger economy for everyone involved because there's more movement of goods within an empire. The general idea is that if an empire is benevolent, it is often a plus for the people that are a part of it in terms of access to goods and resources across the empire that they would not have access to normally. The flip side is the fact of empire becoming a threat to your local identity, your local heritage, culture, and traditions. And this is going to be a recurring theme. The main problem with Sargon's empire is that it is built on, instead of Sargon attempting to oppress the people of all of these places, he builds a relationship of mutual obligation with the princes and kings of the territories that he conquers, and so the empire as a result is entirely dependent upon him, and it doesn't really survive his death. It's all about the deals that he makes between himself and individual princes and kings in order to have this contractual thing that's dependent upon their trust in him, the promises that he makes and so forth. All of that's null and void when he dies. So Sargon's empire is pioneering. It gives us a first example of empire. It also shows us that the pitfalls that we encounter once you try to think about an empire that lasts for more than a few years. And we're going to come back to this as we talk more about empire as we go forward. All right, Epic of Gilgamesh, Tablets 1 and 2, Enkidu. There's lots to say about Enkidu. He starts out as a beast. The second key fact about Enkidu is that he is transformed into a civilized man by having lots of sex with Shamut, the prostitute. Now, what do we mean by civilized man? What is characteristic of Enkidu as a civilized man? As a civilized man, he hears about Gilgamesh raping the brides of Uruk and comes to this angry realization that Gilgamesh is a threat to the community of Uruk. And he runs to Uruk to fight him. He has a fight with Gilgamesh, and Enkidu loses, and as a result, they become big friends. But so this is what it means to be civilized: to be aware of the need to put the community ahead of yourself, and that if someone is attacking the community by placing himself ahead of everyone else, that must be fought. That is The Epic of Gilgamesh's definition of civilization. That is what separates us from the beasts. And this is our starting point for talking about Enkidu. Enkidu starts out as a beast. He has no concerns. He runs with the gazelles. He makes sure that he's fed. And he lives a life of simple contentment. He becomes civilized. The gazelles don't recognize him anymore. And he feels this sense of loss. And he becomes part of the community of mortals and becomes aware of the rules and obligations that means, and becomes infuriated that Gilgamesh is abusing his power, is placing himself ahead of the community. And so, separation between man and beast, this is the definition of what it means to be a human. All the following are true of Gilgamesh's encounter with the goddess Ishtar, except, well, Ishtar proposes marriage because she finds him extremely good-looking. She does. She thinks he's really hot. Gilgamesh talks back to Ishtar. Ishtar turned all of her ex-lovers into toads as soon as she was tired of them, and he's not going to do that. That's also true. Ishtar responds by throwing a tantrum and running to her father. That's also true. The result of that, however, is that they send the bull of heaven, not the bear of heaven. He sends the bull of heaven, which Gilgamesh and Enkidu then fight and defeat. Code of Hammurabi. So, again, the question here, what is the Code of Hammurabi? You start with what it actually is. Don't start with what does it do, what are its characteristics. You get a question like, what is X? Who is X? Who were the X? Your answer starts with, X was such and so from this place and this time. So, Code of Hammurabi is a written law code, written being the operative point here. It is a written law code that dates from the Bronze Age in Babylon, the old Babylonian Empire. And generally speaking, I haven't talked about this, but when we talk about time, I don't tend to ask about particular years. I'm not going to say what happened on March the 15th, 44 BCE. But at the very least, you should know Stone Age, Bronze Age, Iron Age. But it's also useful to, when you're talking about a particular period, if there are multiple things happening, this happens in the 18th century BCE, this happens in the 15th century BCE, that gives you a sense of causality. That gives you a sense of this happens before this. This represents something that is earlier in the story of this culture, and what happens later is a transformation. So not a bad idea to think in terms of centuries if you can. But at the very least, you should be able to say Code of Hammurabi is Bronze Age Babylon. So the key thing about it is that it's a written law code. And it deals with conflicts between citizens and provides very harsh punishments. This is what it's famous for. Why is that important? There are a couple of things that are vital about this. First of all, the Babylonians are ruling over a large empire full of lots of different kinds of people. This is true of empires in general, but especially Mesopotamia. People that have nothing in common. And so they tend to, take care of their own matters and try not to think about, the central authority in Babylon. A written law code binds everybody together and creates a common unity, starts to build a central identity focused on Babylon, strengthens the empire. It also places justice in the hands of the whole. A written law code tends to place justice in the hands of the community as a whole, rather than people taking care of infractions between families, theft and rape and so forth, as private matters between families to be settled privately. Justice with a law code gets people thinking in terms of this belongs to the community. The community is responsible for justice. Again, reinforcing a central identity at the expense of the private and the local, reinforcing the strength of the central authority. Perhaps most of all, a public written law code. We'll see this several times in the course of this semester. A public written law code makes justice reliable and standardized rather than, arbitrary, whatever particular judges want or whatever is traditional in a particular locality. It makes justice standardized and reliable, and therefore reinforces the trustworthiness of the government and the state. And so this reinforces the strength of the central authority in the third way. Several times throughout history, we see this milestone moment, the creation of a law code.
And that's the end of the quiz. Email me with any questions.